We continue to examine the proposed 2022 budgets of the federal government. Tonight, our focus is on the budget of the Ministry of Transportation. Babajide Ogunsanya, data and information consultant, will be our guide, as always.
Good evening, Amarachi.
Good evening, and great to see you. 206 billion naira for this year. That's what's for next year, beg your pardon. That's what the budget says. But what has it been like in the past years?
So let's jump straight into it. Let's avoid the good and bad news. And once we go into the budget for next year, you see, like you said, 206 billion naira. But these are the facts. First, 206 billion naira. The second is there are 6 agencies that will get a sum out of this 206 billion naira. The third and most important is the Federal Ministry of Transportation's headquarters budget, because that is where most of the money goes into, 150 billion naira. Finally, is to understand how exactly will this 150 billion naira be spent. And from the budget details, it shows that 75 billion naira will go to the construction of new railways, and approximately 70 billion naira will go into rehabilitation and renovation of existing railways. So we see that one-to-one sort of split for how the 150 billion naira allocated to the Ministry of Transportation's headquarters will be spent. The hope is that in the future, we will see more money go into construction of railways rather than keep renovating the existing railways. Now, but to what you had asked about how significant is this budget, the fact shows that the budget of 200, yes, we have a 206 billion naira budget for next year, but 2016's budget was more than 206 billion naira. 2017 was more than 206 billion naira. 2018 was more than 206 billion naira.
And what do you think is going on?
Last year was more than 206 billion naira. What is going on is the priorities of the government has changed. I'll explain that later. We've seen since 2016, the government has had 2 major priorities. One priority block, 2016 to 2018, which I'll explain later. The second priorities for the government started changing in 2019. And as we continue this discussion, I hope we'll have some time to go through that.
Yeah, because you mentioned priorities, and I imagine that with 206 billion naira, well, there will be, you know, you have to determine which ones are more important. So how do you do that?
So first is, recently the Minister of Transportation has explained some ways in which the budget is allocated. He used the word politically, practically possible. But before we explain what that means, how do other people budget? In the UK, US, more developed economies, they look at the cost and the benefit. That is the template. For businesses, they have 2 major templates. They either look at the cost, from the cost perspective for businesses, they look at the internal rate of return, IRR. From the value perspective, they look at the net present value for the project. But in Nigeria, we are still yet to define our template. We are looking at the template of politically, practically possible. In other words, politics still takes a major decision, still takes a major place in how projects are prioritized, politics.
And apparently that's affecting everything else, including transportation. Where does that stand, though, in the government's list of priorities? So
let's take a look at, I talked about 2 blocks. Let's take a look at what the government has done between 2016 to 2018 and see what changed between 2019 to date. So the first block, let's take it carefully. In 2016, the priority was Works Power Housing, not defense. Works Power Housing had the budget of 457 billion naira. Then we saw defense with 443, and education was third priority, 403 billion naira. That was still the same thing that happened in 2017. Works Power Housing had a budget of 587 billion naira approved, followed by defense 470 billion, and education third, 456 billion. In 2018, Works Power Housing was still priority for the government. Approved budget from the National Assembly, 715 billion naira. Defense number 2, 578 billion naira. Education, 542 billion naira. That was what the focus of the government 2016 to 2018. Transportation was far behind. Now look at what happened since 2019. It changed. It was no longer Works Power Housing. Number 1 priority became defense, 594 billion naira. Second priority was education, 509 billion naira, before works power housing of 428 billion naira. That was the same thing in 2020. Defense, 878 billion naira approved by the National Assembly. Education, 653 billion naira. And even health got 427 billion naira in 2020, more than even works power housing. 2021, the trend continued. Defense, number one priority. Education, number two priority. Works power housing, number three priority. Transportation, not involved in any of these years. Last year, and for this budget as well, we've seen a budget for defense, 1.14 trillion naira. Education, number two, 876 billion naira. Works power housing, number three, 783 billion naira. In all, you see that last column, transportation. Transportation hasn't been the priority for this government, and that's because the government has looked at what needs to be done urgently. And the summary is it has been defense, education, works, power, housing. And this is the last full year budget of the government. Yes, it is likely that at the end of next year, the president will present the budget for 2023, but it is also more likely that the president wouldn't be the one to implement the budget for 2023. So in the 6 years, in the 7 years of the APC President Buhari's government, what we've seen really is transportation was important, but defense, education, works, power, and housing were urgent and more important.
Yeah. Babajide, well, thanks for explaining this to us. There's still more sectors, I believe, to look at. I can't wait to see what you bring up next week.
Yes, in the final analysis, we've seen the direction of the government, but you know what the wise man once said? Direction is more important than speed, because there are many people that are going fast nowhere.
Thanks again.